I am encouraging my niece to cut contact with her parents. My niece, 19, moved in with me and my two kids, 8 and 10, back in August. She's going to a local college here, and since I have the extra space and live much closer to the campus than her parents do, it just made sense. Or at least, it made sense on paper. I've always known my niece was a quiet kid. Growing up, she was the one who would sit in the corner of family gatherings with a book, never causing trouble, never making a scene. I also knew my sister-in-law wasn't exactly the warm and fuzzy type. She's rigid, clinical, and always seemed more interested in how things looked on the outside than how they felt on the inside. But I didn't know the extent of it. Not until my niece moved through my front door. The only word I can use to describe her when she arrived was broken. It wasn't just that she was shy, it was a deep, soul-crushing withdrawal. For the first few weeks, she was like a ghost in my house. She would go to her classes, come back, and immediately retreat to her room. She'd lock the door, I could hear the click of the deadbolt every single time I walked past, and she wouldn't emerge until she was certain we were all asleep. I started noticing things in the kitchen. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to get a glass of water and find the pantry door ajar or a loaf of bread half gone. She was binge-eating in the middle of the night, almost like a scavenger. It broke my heart. It was like she didn't feel she had the right to eat in front of us, or like she had to hide the fact that she had basic human needs. The most jarring thing, though, was her reaction to my kids. I'm a very affectionate mom. I hug my 8 and 10-year-olds all the time. I kiss their foreheads before they go to school, I tell them I love them probably 50 times a day, and even though they can both read perfectly well on their own, I still sit on their beds at night and read chapters of Harry Potter or whatever series they're into. I caught my niece watching us from the hallway one night while I was tucking them in. The look on her face wasn't jealousy, it was pure, unadulterated confusion. It was the look you'd give an alien if it landed in your backyard and started performing a ritual you'd never seen before. A few days later, she asked me, "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" I asked. "The reading. And the hugging. They're big kids. They don't need it." "They don't need it to survive," I told her gently, "but they need it to know they're loved. Don't you think?" She just looked at the floor and didn't say a word for the rest of the night. Around October, I finally convinced her to start therapy. I told her it was a condition of her staying here, not because I wanted to be controlling, but because I could see her drowning. She started going twice a week. Slowly, painfully slowly, the walls started to have tiny cracks in them. We started a routine. After I put my kids to bed, I'd sit in the living room with the TV on low, and I'd just wait. Eventually, she'd crack her door open. Then she'd come sit on the far end of the couch. For the first month, she wouldn't even look at me. But we'd talk. I'd tell her about my day, about the mundane stresses of work, and I wouldn't pressure her to give me anything back. Eventually, the stories started trickling out. She told me about the time she was 16 and got a violent stomach flu. She was vomiting so hard she collapsed on the bathroom floor, unable to get up. Her mom walked in, looked at her lying there in her own mess, and her first words weren't, "Are you okay?" or "Let me help you." They were, "Are you going to clean that up?" It's disgusting. She told me about her birthdays. Since she got her driver's license at 16, she has been the one to drive herself to the bakery to pick up her own birthday cake because her mom didn't have time for errands that weren't essential. But the one that really got to me, the one that made me have to excuse myself to go cry in the bathroom, was when she talked about trying to share her feelings. Whenever she tried to vent about a hard day at school or a struggle with a friend, her mom would look at her with total boredom and say, "Do you know what I just heard? Wah. That's what you sound like. Are you done?" It was systematic emotional starvation. She had been raised to believe that her voice didn't matter, her pain was an inconvenience, and her presence was a burden. Despite all this, she's an incredible person. She works part-time at a preschool near the university, and one day I had to drop off her forgotten lunch. I stood at the gate for a minute and watched her. She was a completely different human being. She was sitting on the grass with 3 toddlers climbing over her, and she was laughing. A real, genuine, bright laugh. She was patient, she was kind, and she was so present with those kids. Later that week, I ran into one of the parents of the kids in her class. When the woman realized I was her aunt, she grabbed my arm. "Your niece is a godsend," she said. "My son has such bad separation anxiety, but he'll only go to her. She has this way of making him feel so safe." I went home and looked at this girl, who could provide so much safety to others but felt none for herself, and I just felt this burning rage toward my brother and his wife. The pattern became impossible to ignore, the regression cycles. Every Sunday, she would call her parents. Or every other weekend, she'd take the train back home to see them because she felt obligated. And every single time, without fail, she would come back a shell of herself. If she spent a Saturday at their house, she'd return and the bedroom door would be locked for 3 days. She would stop speaking. The late-night binges would return with a vengeance. We had made progress where she could sit within 2 feet of me on the couch, but after a visit home, if I even walked toward her, I could see her entire body go rigid. She'd shrink away as if she expected to be struck, even though I've never raised a hand to her in my life. It was a visceral, physical reaction to the emotional toll they took on her. I eventually bought her a mini fridge and a small freezer for her room. Not to encourage the hiding, but to take away the shame of the scavenging. I told her, if you're hungry and you don't feel like coming down, that's okay. You have your own space. That actually helped more than I expected. Once the secret of her eating was gone, she felt less like a criminal, and she slowly started eating dinner at the table with us more often. The breaking point happened last Tuesday. She had a phone call with her mother. I don't know exactly what was said, but I heard the tone of my SIL's voice through the door, sharp, biting, and dismissive. When my niece came out of her room an hour later, she looked gray. She sat down at the kitchen island while I was making tea and she just stared at her hands. I don't feel like myself when I talk to them, she whispered. I feel like I'm disappearing. I spend all week trying to build myself up, and then 15 minutes on the phone with her turns me back into a ghost. I sat down across from her. I didn't reach for her hand because I knew she couldn't handle the touch right then. I just looked at her. You know, I said, you don't have to do that anymore. She looked up, confused. Do what? Talk to them. See them. You're 19. You're an adult, and you're living under my roof. If someone makes you feel like you're disappearing, you are allowed to walk away from them. Even if they're your parents. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. She looked terrified, but also like a light had been switched on in a room that had been dark for 2 decades. I can do that, she asked. You can, I said. You have to protect your peace. You're in therapy, you're working so hard to heal, and they are essentially coming in every weekend and ripping the scabs off. How are you supposed to get better if they keep wounding you? She told me she wanted to talk to her therapist about it first. I said that was a great idea. On Thursday, she came home from her session and her eyes looked clear. She asked me to help her draft a text. She didn't want to call because she knew her mother would wah her into submission. Together, we wrote, Mom, Dad. I am taking some time to focus on my mental health and my studies. At this time, I've decided that I need to stop all contact with you. Please do not call me or come to my name's house. I will reach out if and when I am ready. I need you to respect this boundary. She hit send. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped the phone on the rug. Then, with my help, she blocked their numbers. She also blocked them on Instagram and Facebook. For the first time since August, she stayed in the living room and watched a whole movie with me and the kids. She even let my 8-year-old lean against her shoulder. It was a massive victory. Then, the fallout began. Since my niece's phone is blocked, my brother and SIL have turned their sights on me. My phone hasn't stopped buzzing for 48 hours. My brother called me a family destroyer. He sent a long, rambling text saying that I've always been jealous of their disciplined household and that I'm trying to turn his daughter into a soft, entitled brat like my own kids. My SIL sent an email, since I blocked her on text, saying that she knows I'm the one who forced her daughter to do this. She wrote, she was a perfectly normal, quiet, respectful girl before she moved in with you. Now she's mentally ill? You're the one who put these ideas in her head. You're poisoning her against us because you want to play savior. If you don't make her call US by Sunday, we are cutting off her tuition. That's the threat that's making me waver. I can afford to feed her. I can afford to let her live here for free. But I cannot afford her university tuition on my own. If they cut her off, she might have to drop out or take out massive loans. I shared this with my niece, and she actually stayed remarkably calm. She said, if that's the price of my freedom, I'll take the loans. I'd rather be in debt than go back to that house. But my extended family is starting to chime in too. My mom, the grandmother, called me crying, saying that family is family and that I shouldn't have encouraged a child to abandon her parents. She thinks I overstepped and that I should have tried to mediate a conversation instead of helping her go nuclear. Am I the asshole? I see the change in her. I see her smiling, I see her eating, I see her finally starting to exist as a person and not a shadow. But her parents are right about one thing, she wasn't like this before. She was fine because she was compliant and repressed. I'm the one who told her she didn't have to take it anymore. I'm the one who suggested the no contact. Did I overstep? Should I have just stayed out of it and let her figure it out on her own, even if it took years? My brother is making me feel like I've kidnapped his daughter's mind, and the guilt is starting to eat at me. Am I the a-hole for encouraging her to cut them off? Edit, to those asking about the tuition, She has a small savings account from her preschool job and her summer work, but it won't cover much. We're going to the financial aid office on Monday to see what her options are if her parents officially withdraw support. And for the record, she's still in therapy and her therapist apparently told her this was a healthy and necessary step for her recovery, which makes me feel a bit better. But the family pressure is intense. Update: my SIL just showed up at my front door. I didn't open it. She stood on the porch for 10 minutes yelling that she knew I was hiding her. My kids were scared, so I finally told her through the Ring camera that if she didn't leave, I was calling the police. She left, but not before screaming that I'm dead to the family. My niece is currently in her room. She hasn't locked the door, but she's very quiet. I'm just sitting here wondering if I've made her life easier or infinitely more complicated. Update 2. The last few weeks have felt longer than the entire semester before them. After my sister-in-law showed up at the house and screamed on the porch, everything shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. Up until that moment, the conflict had mostly lived inside phones and emails. It was loud, stressful, and constant, but it still felt distant enough that our home stayed a safe space. Once she stood outside yelling while my kids hid behind me, that illusion disappeared. My niece didn't come out of her room for the rest of that night. The door stayed open, just barely, which told me she was fighting the instinct to shut herself away completely. I checked on her before bed and found her sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, staring at nothing. She wasn't crying. That almost worried me more. It was the same empty stillness she had when she first moved in, like someone had quietly unplugged her from the world. The next morning she went to class anyway. That alone felt like a victory. She moved slowly, mechanically, but she went. When she came home, she sat at the kitchen table while my kids did homework and actually stayed there instead of disappearing upstairs. The normalcy felt fragile, like glass that might crack if anyone breathed too hard. The calls from my brother didn't stop. He alternated between rage and pleading, sometimes within the same voicemail. One message accused me of brainwashing his daughter. The next begged me to fix whatever misunderstanding this is. He insisted she had always been sensitive and that college stress was making her dramatic. Listening to him talk about her like she was malfunctioning instead of hurting made my stomach turn. 2 days later, the tuition threat became real. My niece received an email from the university billing office notifying her that the upcoming semester payment had been cancelled. Her parents hadn't just threatened it, they had already withdrawn the funds. She read the email silently at the kitchen island while I made dinner. I watched her shoulders tense, then slowly drop. No yelling, no panic. Just a quiet acceptance that felt far too heavy for someone her age. She folded the laptop closed and asked if we could still go to the financial aid office Monday like we planned. That meeting was sobering. The advisor was kind but realistic. Emergency grants were limited. Loans were possible, but because she was under 24 and financially dependent on her parents on paper, the process would be complicated. Appeals could take months. There was no guarantee she could stay enrolled without an immediate payment plan. On the drive home she stared out the window the entire time. Traffic crawled past and students crossed the street with backpacks and coffee cups, moving through ordinary lives that suddenly felt out of reach for her. She admitted that she felt embarrassed more than anything else. Not angry, not devastated, embarrassed. She hated needing help and hated that her life seemed to hinge on people who clearly wanted control over her. That week, the regression came back in small ways at first. She skipped dinner one night, then another. The mini fridge started emptying faster again. I'd find wrappers tucked into the trash at odd hours. She wasn't hiding as intensely as before, but the progress we had celebrated started slipping quietly backward. Her therapist suggested limiting outside stress and maintaining routines, but reality didn't cooperate. My extended family began contacting her directly through social media accounts she had forgotten to block. Cousins sent long messages about forgiveness and respect. An aunt wrote that parents sometimes sound harsh because they care. Someone forwarded her screenshots of family group chats discussing her like she wasn't a person but a problem to solve. One evening she handed me her phone and asked me to read a message from her grandmother. It said the family was worried she was being manipulated and that she should come home for a weekend so everyone could talk sense into her. The phrasing alone made my niece physically recoil. She didn't respond. She just deleted the app entirely. For a few days after that, things actually seemed calmer. Without constant messages, she relaxed a little. She laughed at something my youngest said during dinner and even helped my older child with a school project. Watching her kneel on the living room floor cutting construction paper felt like seeing sunlight after weeks of rain. Then another letter arrived. It was addressed directly to her, sent certified mail. Inside was a formal notice from her parents stating that unless she resumed contact immediately, they would consider her financially independent and remove her from their health insurance and all remaining support. The wording was cold and legalistic, like a contract termination rather than communication between parents and their child. She read it twice and sat very still. I expected tears or anger, but she just looked tired. That night she admitted something she hadn't said before. She didn't miss her parents themselves. She missed the idea that maybe someday they would change. Cutting contact hadn't just removed pain, it removed hope, and that loss was heavier than she expected. Around the same time, problems started at her job at the preschool. She had been arriving late more often, exhausted from sleepless nights filled with anxiety about money and school. One afternoon she came home early and told me she'd been asked to reduce her hours temporarily until things stabilized. They were kind about it, she said, but they needed consistency. Losing those hours meant losing income she had counted on for tuition and daily expenses. I could see the panic beginning to build beneath her calm exterior. The house atmosphere changed gradually. She spent more time in her room again, though the door stayed open. Conversations grew shorter. The easy moments we'd started to have faded, replaced by a quiet tension neither of us knew how to fix. I began questioning myself more than ever. Every time she looked overwhelmed, I wondered if encouraging distance from her parents had removed the only financial safety net she had. The emotional safety mattered, but reality demanded rent, tuition, insurance, groceries. Love didn't cover bills. One evening she asked if we could talk after the kids went to bed. She sat across from me on the couch, twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt, and admitted she felt guilty watching me worry about her future. She didn't want to become another responsibility weighing down my household. I told her she wasn't a burden, but she shook her head gently. She said she knew what burdens looked like because she'd spent her life trying not to be one. A week later she received notice that without payment, she would be dropped from 2 of her classes. Appeals were still pending, but deadlines didn't wait for paperwork. That night she didn't come downstairs at all. I left dinner outside her door. In the morning the plate was empty but untouched emotionally, if that makes sense. The spark she'd begun to develop earlier in the semester seemed to dim further. The real turning point came quietly. No argument, no dramatic moment. She told me she had requested a leave of absence from school. She framed it as temporary, just until finances stabilized, but the defeat in her voice made it clear she didn't believe she'd be returning soon. Without classes, her routine collapsed. Days blurred together. She picked up extra shifts when the preschool allowed it, but the reduced schedule left long stretches of idle time that fed her anxiety. Therapy continued, though she started coming home drained instead of hopeful. My brother stopped calling me eventually. The silence felt worse than the anger. Through relatives, I heard that they believed she would eventually come to her senses. They assumed hardship would send her back. Months passed like that. Winter settled in. The kids grew used to her quiet presence again, though they still tried to include her whenever they could. She smiled for them, always gentle, always patient, but the brightness I had once seen at the preschool never fully returned. One afternoon I found her sitting at the kitchen table filling out job applications unrelated to her field of study. Retail positions, administrative work, anything full-time with benefits. She explained matter-of-factly that stability mattered more right now than long-term plans. I realized then that college, the future she had been building toward, was slipping away piece by piece. Her eating habits stabilized somewhat, but the emotional distance returned. She wasn't hiding the way she once had, yet she also wasn't growing anymore. It felt like watching someone pause mid-recovery, stuck between survival and healing. Spring came, and with it a message from her father through a new email account. He wrote that they were willing to help financially again if she agreed to family counseling and resumed regular contact. The conditions were clear: reconciliation first, support second. She stared at the email for a long time. I didn't offer advice this time. I had learned how heavy my influence felt to her, even when unintended. She eventually closed the laptop without replying. That night she admitted she didn't know if she had the strength to reopen that door, but she also didn't know how to keep moving forward without resources she simply didn't have. Both options hurt in different ways. Weeks passed without a decision. Life settled into a muted routine. She worked, attended therapy, helped around the house, and existed in a careful emotional middle ground where nothing got worse but nothing truly improved either. If this situation gets better, I will let you know definitely.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.